Available now from Pure Video, packing made easy with Pack Like a Pro and techniques of canopy control in Fly Like a Pro, both only $19.99 each.
This is the Racer Elite from the Jump Shack. The Racer Elite is stylish and comfortable. The Racer Elite is proven, rugged, and reliable. The Racer Elite is functional and fast. The Jump Shack, excellence for over 25 years.
My name is Marcus and I'm the executive producer of the Breakaway project. Before we get started, I'd like to take a few moments to help explain how we've structured this program and also suggest some ways that you can use this tape to become a safer and more aware skydiver. Time is the most critical element in an emergency, and we've classified emergencies into two main groups, high speed and then low speed. First, the most basic emergencies and their procedures will be covered, followed by the more complex situations. To make it easier to apply this information, malfunctions that are similar in cause and have the same corrective action are grouped together in several short sections. Watch this entire video from beginning to end. Then watch one section at a time until you feel you thoroughly know the information and are ready to apply it with some hands-on experience. When I say hands-on, I mean check your gear for conditions that may cause or contribute to a malfunction. Refer to the video during this process or make a list, if necessary, that can help you refer to each point.
In this section, we'll look at the causes, prevention, and emergency procedures for the total malfunction. First of all, what is a total malfunction?
Three types of total malfunction, where you can't find the ripcord, you find the ripcord, you can't pull it, and you find the ripcord, you pull the ripcord, and nothing happens after that.
The time factor is critical with a total malfunction.
Total malfunction requires immediate attention, but in general it doesn't seem that dangerous because you're conscious and capable of reacting to it.
Let's take a look at the three basic total malfunctions. First, the missing handle. If the pilot chute activation handle becomes dislodged on exit or during free fall, it may be recoverable. If you're above the hard deck, you may have a few seconds for an attempt to find and pull the handle. On the pullout, place your right hand where the bridle exits the container and follow it to the handle. If you're below the hard deck, immediately activate the reserve.
Like any other skydiving skill, first practice locating your handles on the ground until they're automated by drill. Put your rig on and make sure it is properly adjusted. To establish your body landmarks in relation to your handles, first, press each handle firmly into your body and note its location. Start with your main, and then your breakaway, and then your reserve. Okay, and then practice your pull sequence, locating your handles until you can reach them with your eyes closed.
Main, breakaway, reserve.
Okay, now let's try this from the free fall position. You come over here and lay on this bench. Let's practice pulling your main. If you reach for your handle and you can't find it, think about where your hand is on your body and move it to the new location. Okay, let's try that again. On your first jump with an unfamiliar rig, plan on pulling at a higher than normal altitude to give yourself a little extra time for this procedure. In the air, take a few seconds after exit to locate and touch all the activation handles. This action will train your stimulus response mechanism in the air where it counts. You'll notice throughout this video that your options during an emergency are primarily determined by altitude. Actually, there are three important altitudes that correspond to the critical events when it's time to end the free fall: pull altitude, decision altitude, and the hard deck. You should know the correct pull altitude for your experience level. The decision altitude, where you decide whether or not you have a malfunction, should be no lower than 1,800 feet. If you have a malfunction, you should begin your emergency procedures no lower than 1,500 feet. That's the hard deck. Now here's some food for thought. If you pull at 2,000 feet and have a high-speed malfunction, you need to do everything right and not have any problems. Here's why. With a pull altitude of 2,000 feet, you'll be at the decision altitude of 1,800 feet in about a second. That's 1 second to decide whether or not you have a problem. Then, in a little more than 1 more second, you will be at the hard deck altitude of 1,500 feet. This is the altitude, the hard deck altitude, where you need to take action on the emergency. At this altitude, you have less than 10 seconds to open a parachute and save your life. As you can see, these are really minimum altitudes, and you should adjust your pull altitude upward depending on your experience and your level of awareness.
As far as pack opening altitudes, which is the way it's referred to in the USPA basic safety regulations, you have to be careful when you look at that. They're not recommending a 2,000 foot opening altitude. They're recommending that that's the minimum pack opening altitude. In some cases, it might be relatively safe to do so. If you're jumping by yourself with large docile parachutes, might not be a problem. If you are doing relative work with a lot of people, with a lot of heavily loaded canopies, and there's not enough room to safely open the parachutes, you tend to go a little lower. And to me, when you tend to go a little lower, you should go maybe down to 2,000 feet. So, although that might be a minimum altitude, I think a more appropriate opening altitude to plan on is somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 feet.
A hard pull is caused by a packing error. Make only 2 vigorous attempts to activate the main, then immediately pull to reserve. You must maintain altitude awareness to avoid becoming preoccupied with trying to pull the main. Misrouting the lanyard can cause a pull-out hard pull. Overzealous tucking of the lanyard under the side flap can cause the lanyard to hang up on the bottom flap stiffener, locking the lanyard. A hand deploy hard pull is usually a packing error causing a monkey fist, material bunched up at the mouth of the pouch. This is more likely to be a problem if the pilot chute pouch is tight. The best way to prevent a problem is to use a spandex pilot chute pouch. If the main is activated but nothing happens, the problem is probably a pilot chute hesitation, not a total.
With any hand deploy system, it's important that the jumper positively launch the pilot chute into the relative wind. The hand deploy is meant to be activated from a flat and stable position with an arm motion parallel to the ground to ensure that the pilot chute and bridle don't entangle with your arm. Firmly grasp the pilot chute handle with your right hand while compensating for heading and stability with your left. In one smooth motion, extract the pilot chute from the pouch and throw it into the airstream out to the side, away from your body. As you look up to watch the opening, continue moving your arms forward, which will cause you to rotate head high. Thus, your opening shock will be better absorbed by the harness system instead of your body.
The pull-out pilot chute is meant to be launched from a stable body position. That is, the shoulders level to the ground. If you begin from a flat and stable position, the body must immediately begin a transition from this point through the rest of the opening sequence, ending with the jumper hanging vertically in the saddle. Accomplishing this maneuver is best done by gently looking up over the head, keeping the rotation in control and slightly ahead of the pull of the canopy. The shoulders must be kept level to prevent uneven line tension, the single biggest cause of canopy malfunctions. The purpose of this head-high rotation is to disrupt the burble over the back, as well as put the jumper in a position in the harness to best accept opening shock.
A pilot chute in tow can be caused by a misrouted hand deploy bridle or an uncocked collapsible pilot chute.
Pilot chute in tow, nasty malfunction, mostly because you can't cut the pilot chute in tow away, so it means you have to pull the reserve, and there's always a possibility that the pilot chute on the reserve and the pilot chute on the main could entangle.
If the pilot chute in tow is caused by a misrouted bridle, the main will probably stay in the container during a reserve deployment. Immediately activate the reserve at the established hard deck. Don't sit up on deployment, since it increases the chances of an entanglement. If an uncocked kill line pilot chute tows, the results are unpredictable. The pilot chute may work immediately, or on the other hand, it may tow for a while and then suddenly open and lift off. In the meantime, you're losing altitude fast. When you reach the hard deck, pull the reserve.
Because a pilot chute in tow is strictly a packing error, this malfunction can be avoided by checking a few items before you jump. On the hand deploy, make sure the bridle runs directly from the closing pin to the pilot chute. If you have a collapsible pilot chute, verify that the kill line has been fully extended. The colored portion of the kill line should be visible in the inspection window on the bridle. Refer to your rig manufacturer's owner's manual for additional information on how to perform a correct equipment check and recommendations on emergency procedures.
A simultaneous or near simultaneous deployment may cause both the main and reserve to open.
A dual square situation can develop from an AAD firing, poorly maintained equipment, or a pilot chute in tow that suddenly clears during a reserve deployment. The recommended procedure for each situation depends on each individual set of circumstances. If a compatible reserve is activated following the main parachute deployment and both canopies are open, a biplane is a likely result. The biplane may be fully developed after the main opens, or may result from the reserve opening as it trails behind the jumper. In any event, if the top of the leading edge of the rear canopy is below the trailing edge of the front canopy, the likely result is a biplane. Both canopies will be flying in the same direction with one behind the other, a configuration that seems to be stable and easy to control. If the jumper has directional control, leave the brakes stowed on the rear canopy and fly the biplane using gentle toggle input of the front canopy. Releasing the front canopy of a biplane is not recommended, since there is a high probability of the risers fouling the other canopy. Do not flare either canopy for landing. Although the rate of descent will probably be quite slow, even with small, highly loaded canopies, be prepared to do a PLF. If the taller of the two canopies opens in back of the shorter canopy, a side-by-side is the likely result. In fact, the side-by-side is likely to develop any time the top of the leading edge of the rear canopy is above the trailing edge of the front canopy. In a stable side-by-side, both canopies will be flying in the same direction with one beside the other, either with the end cells touching or the end cell of the shorter canopy resting against the outside lines of the taller canopy. Note that if the main is the taller of the two canopies in a side-by-side, the main risers pass in back of the reserve risers. If the side-by-side isn't stable or controllable, the two canopies are not tangled, and if time and altitude permits, disconnect any RSL and cut away the main canopy. If this configuration is stable and the jumper has directional control, steer using gentle control movements of the larger, dominant canopy. On the landing, don't flare either canopy and be prepared to do a PLF. If the main deploys second and has line twists, the result may be a downplane. This situation is most likely to happen when the reserve is fully open and the main is trailing behind the jumper. In a downplane, both canopies are flying away from each other and toward the ground at a high rate of descent. This is a high-speed situation requiring immediate action. Disconnect any RSL and cut away the main canopy. If the line twists are not severe, the downplane may evolve into a side-by-side on its own. However, if the line twists remain, this is not a good side-by-side to land, and a cutaway is probably the best option. In fact, if the reserve is open and the main is trailing behind, it may be best to disconnect any RSL and cut away the main canopy to avoid the possibility of a downplane. Due to the many variables involved, the results of a simultaneous deployment are somewhat unpredictable. Testing has shown that although in most instances both canopies will open successfully, occasionally a simultaneous deployment could result in an entanglement. If this occurs, try pulling the risers, lines, or toggles to resolve the situation. Be cautious about immediately cutting away the main, since this may complicate the situation. It's important to jump the proper equipment, and this is especially true in a dual square situation. It's easier to fly and land the canopies if they're of similar size. Of course, it's best just to avoid the situation entirely. Make sure your gear is properly maintained and check your equipment before every jump. If an AAD is used, make sure it is properly maintained and is correctly calibrated.
Everything okay?
Then avoid a high rate of descent near the AAD activation altitude. In fact, it's a good idea to establish a buffer zone between your opening altitude and your AAD's activation altitude. How much? That depends on your AAD and your main canopy's opening characteristics.
Hey, anybody home?
Conventional myth.
Come on in and check out the all-new skydiving cable network. Wow, look at that. Yeah, night jump channel. There's AFF, big formations, cutaways, you name it. Whoa, back up. What was that? Tandem lingerie channel. Cool. Let's watch this 8-way burn some points.
Out of sight. Even the Army team has their own channel.
No, just the 8-way.
Hey, wait a minute. Everyone on there's wearing a Vector.
But of course, this is a Relative Workshop commercial.
The Performance Design's goal: build parachutes that offer superior solutions to your needs. Sure, we have the most extensive R&D programs ever, and the most advanced laser cutting technology in the industry, but that's not all. It's also our team. We're not just manufacturers, we're also customers. In every department, from design to R&D, production to sales, you'll find skydivers, people who don't just talk about parachutes, but put them to the test personally. It's this blend of advanced technology and practical application we feel enables us to offer what many people agree are the finest parachutes available today. Whether it's a Spectre or Silhouette, Sabre or Stiletto, PD Reserve or PD 9-cell, there's a Performance Designs canopy to suit your needs. Try one, and we think you'll agree. At Performance Designs, the proof is in the performance. Imagine the difficulty in selecting 110 qualified participants to complete Florida's largest formation. It was. Now imagine the difficulty in selecting 110 qualified participants who each jumped a javelin. It wasn't. Sunpath Javelin. Let the sky be your limit, not your container. In this section, we'll look at the causes, prevention, and emergency procedures for high-speed partial malfunctions.
A high-speed malfunction requires immediate action because you're at freefall speeds and time is critical. You have a partial malfunction if your main canopy has left the container. Remember, if you have a partial malfunction, you must cut away before you pull the reserve to avoid an entanglement.
Horseshoe malfunction is when part of the parachute is attached to you in a place other than the risers. The parachute goes up and back down, and it's tied to your hand or tied to your foot or tied to part of the container system.
Instability on deployment can result in the pilot chute or bridle becoming tangled on the jumper's body or equipment.
Well, horseshoe malfunctions, fortunately,
are also getting rarer and rarer in the sport. Reason for that is that we are teaching more and more stability. Deploying stable will do its part in eliminating and reducing horseshoe malfunctions.
A horseshoe can result if the main leaves the container with the pilot chute still in the pouch. This can happen from inadequate bridle retention, or if the bridle is snagged on exit, or if the jumper mistakenly pulls the bridle instead of the pilot chute handle. If the pilot chute is in the pouch, try to extract it and then deal with the result. Here you see the worst possible situation, a horseshoed main that the jumper can't clear. Obviously, a breakaway lessens the chances of a reserve entanglement. However, a horseshoe may not develop enough drag to release the risers or activate an RSL. If you run out of time, your only option is to pull the reserve and hope for the best.
The ripcord, bottom of container hand deploy, and pullouts are the most secure pilot chute systems. These should be used when doing vertical relative work or board flying. With the leg strap hand deploy, make regular inspections to ensure the bridle is properly secured. With the bottom of container hand deploy, be certain that the exposed bridle is secure. Or, better yet, safely covered like this rig. Also, make sure your closing loop is in good condition and that it securely retains the closing pin. A horseshoe malfunction is one of the most dangerous situations you can have. Well-maintained gear, equipment awareness in the air, and a good stable deployment will make sure that you only see this malfunction on video.
The next high-speed malfunction we'll examine is the bag lock.
Bag lock is high-speed malfunction. You're probably with a bag lock. There's maybe just enough drag on a bag lock to stand you up, but not much to slow you down. Once you stand up, you lose the drag of your body and you probably increase your speed. So bag lock sometimes can be faster than a flat and stable terminal velocity. High-speed malfunction, cut it away and pull the reserve now.
If you look up and have a bag lock, this is what you'll see. Don't ever try to correct this problem. You don't have time. Immediately break away and activate the reserve.
A good pilot chute and secure line stows are important since a bag lock may result from a loop of prematurely released line going over the bag and locking it closed. Proper line stows should stick out about 2 or 2.5 inches past the stow bands and have a release force of 12 to 14 pounds. A bag lock can also be caused by a tumbling bag, either from an out-of-sequence deployment or bad body position. The time between pilot chute release and canopy opening is critical. In a high-speed situation, seconds count, and you need every one.
A streamer and a slow opening are closely related and are high-speed, time-critical situations. A streamer occurs when the opening sequence stops with the main out of the bag. If the canopy is not developing, the problem is probably not correctable. Cut away and pull the reserve. This is what you'll see if you have a streamer. Notice that the slider is not visible, which indicates a real problem.
A slow opening or a snivel occurs when the canopy has left the deployment bag and doesn't immediately inflate, even though there is nothing visibly wrong. This is generally a sign of degraded fabric porosity and line trim, or a deliberate design parameter to reduce the opening shock. In either case, it's important to be familiar with the opening characteristics of your particular canopy. If you have a slow opening rather than a streamer, you'll see the slider fully spread with 4 distinct line groups from the risers to the slider grommets. Maintain altitude awareness, and if the canopy doesn't open, cut away and pull the reserve no lower than the hard deck. Although in many cases pulling on the rear risers will probably cause the canopy to open, be cautious. Pulling on the risers on some high-performance canopies may induce line twists. Both rear risers must be pulled down evenly while maintaining a symmetrical body position to avoid a rapid turn on inflation. Remember, if you can't see the slider, you probably have a streamer, so don't waste time. Immediately break away and activate the reserve. Since streamers are usually due to sloppy packing, a few extra minutes on the ground can save you a lot of grief in the air. Slow openings, on the other hand, are a characteristic of some canopies. If your canopy normally opens slow, pull higher, 2,500 to 3,000 feet rather than 2 grand, and be ready to take corrective action. If slow openings make you uncomfortable, you might think about getting a different canopy. Above all, don't become complacent. In a high-speed situation, it's easy to lose track of time and altitude.
Failure of the riser or release system is very rare. However, it does happen. If you have a failure, you'll know about it right away. Obviously, there's no way to fix this problem. Immediately break away and activate the reserve.
Riser breakage occurs primarily on 1-inch wide Type 17 risers. The majority of these failures occur at the point where the webbing at the bottom of the riser wraps around the large harness ring. After carefully considering the problem, a consortium of manufacturers in the parachute industry have concluded that reinforcement of this area is the best solution. A red or orange reinforcement identifies the stronger, improved risers. The 3-ring release system can inadvertently release if the locking loop fails due to incorrect ring assembly or incorrect riser construction or wear. A correct 3-ring assembly looks like this. Notice that each ring passes through only one other ring. The white loop is threaded through the small ring, then through the riser grommet, and then the cable housing grommet. Only the yellow release cable passes through the white loop. The reserve repack should include a check of the entire system, including a functional check of the release system. The release should activate effortlessly with one hand. If it's at all difficult to pull in this static situation, it may be impossible if the release is highly loaded under a spinning malfunction. If you experience any difficulty whatsoever, you have a problem that needs to be fixed. In addition, periodic maintenance is required with the 3-ring system and should be accomplished at least once a month. Before you jump, make sure your system is properly assembled and in good condition. Your main parachute release is your escape mechanism. Make sure it absolutely works. Your survival depends on it.
You might never experience a malfunction. It's also possible you may have one on your next jump, and you need to be ready in case it does happen. Being ready involves planning your response, training to react, and staying aware during the skydive. To help you in these areas, we'll take a systematic approach. This starts with an understanding of what happens both physically and mentally when you face the stress of dealing with a malfunction. The human body's response to a threatening situation is the release of adrenaline, our most powerful hormone. Adrenaline causes a tremendous increase in both physical strength and pain tolerance. It also produces muscular trembling and the loss of manual dexterity. Mentally, the conscious ability to make a correct decision is greatly diminished, and tunnel vision occurs. In extreme cases, fright and panic may cause an individual to momentarily freeze or react in a disorganized manner. During a malfunction, these factors, combined with jumper indecision, add up to a recipe for disaster. Fortunately, prior planning, deeper awareness, and thorough training can prepare you to safely and easily handle a malfunction.
Safely handling a malfunction starts on the ground. Use all available information to decide your response. Then, stick to your plan in the air.
Once you have a plan, it's important to keep track of time and altitude to avoid the effects of temporal distortion. Have you ever heard that term before?
No.
Temporal distortion is defined as the stress-related alteration of our sense of time. Specifically, many individuals perceive that time slows down and that they have more time to deal with an emergency situation than they really do. Of course, this is a false assumption which causes many jumpers to perform their emergency procedures too late, and sometimes not at all, because you get the idea that time has slowed down when it really hasn't. Recognizing that your internal sense of time is giving you false information in advance gives you the opportunity to take steps to avoid the effects of temporal distortion. Periodically, you can do an awareness check by looking at the ground in your altimeter. If you have a malfunction or an emergency, then you know the altitude you were at when you started. Also, keep in mind that if you pull a little bit higher, then you'll have a little more time to deal with emergencies. Another thing you can do is maintain situational awareness during deployment, to the point of even expecting a malfunction. If you do that, it'll help you remain calm and avoid a panic reaction if you have a malfunction.
During the deployment, Mentally, focus on your planned response to a malfunction at each moment. If you observe the opening process for immediate indications of a problem, you'll be ready with emergency procedures without delay.
Drilling the emergency procedures until they're automatic enables you to take the right action. That way, when you realize you have a problem, you already have a plan. Here are some suggested guidelines for emergency procedures.
Since conscious action may be limited in an emergency, malfunction procedures must be as simple as possible and remain the same throughout the jumper's career. In addition, malfunction procedures should form a continuous chain of actions without interruptions requiring complex mental processes. The activating handles for the parachute system should be standardized for everyone, from student to experienced.
To remain proficient, emergency procedures must be practiced at regular intervals using a combination of physical and mental methods.
There are two generally accepted breakaway procedures. Method 1 is arch the body. Look and grasp the breakaway handle. Look at the reserve ripcord. Pull the breakaway handle. Grasp and pull the reserve handle. Each of these actions is usually performed with two hands. Proponents of this method point out that the action of break away is clearly separated from the action of activate the reserve. This prevents pulling the handles in the reverse order, which could lead to an entanglement. Also, two hands on one handle is better in the event of a hard pull. Opponents point out that stress may cause the jumper to react incorrectly, and he may fail to look, reach, pull the reserve. Also, a properly manufactured and maintained three-ring release should never require two hands for activation, even when highly loaded, and this should be checked on the ground. Breakaway method 2 is arch the body. Look and grasp the breakaway handle. Look and grasp the reserve handle. Peel and pull the breakaway handle. Pull the reserve handle. These actions are performed with one hand on each handle. It is important not to remove the reserve ripcord from the pocket until the main has been released, since in the event of a difficult activation, the reserve hand is brought over to assist in the breakaway. This method best meets the criteria of simple procedures and continuous chain of actions. With one hand on the reserve ripcord before breakaway, the problem of locating and pulling the handle under stress is avoided.
It is absolutely essential that the jumper is properly trained to make sure that the main parachute is actually released before the reserve is activated.
Since vision is one of our strongest senses, whichever method is used, the eyes are firmly fixed on the handles during the breakaway. This enables the jumper to stay focused on finding and pulling the handles to successfully complete the emergency procedure. An arched body position during the breakaway contributes to a clean and reliable reserve deployment. Pull the reserve as soon as practical after the breakaway.
To specify a clear sequence, key words are used with each distinct action during training. These same key words are used each time the emergency procedures are practiced.
Look red, reach red, look silver, pull red, reach silver, pull silver.
Maintain proficiency by practicing emergency procedures at regular intervals. The reserve repack is a good time to try a breakaway and reserve activation. This also checks the rig's functionality.
Red, silver, go, stop.
Of course, there's also the importance of a jumper's physical state. Skydiving while ill or hungover is not a good idea. As in any athletic event, proper rest and good nutrition are necessary for the best body and brain function. In other words, it's important to be in good health and feel good when you skydive for maximum performance. After all, your life and the safety of others depends on it.
Surflight is the leading manufacturer on skysurfing boards and skysurf training worldwide. Because of 8 years of dedication to this discipline, Surflight provides a complete service that meets the needs of our customers. From instruction at the Surflight Training Center to the equipment essential for safely learning how to surf the skies. Surflight, the surf is up. With timeout audible and visual flashing altimeter, you now have warnings at 3 important altitudes.
In a low-speed situation, more time is available to deal with the problem, but the rate of descent is probably higher than normal. Visually check your canopy and do a controllability check immediately after opening. If you do have a malfunction, it's critically important that you maintain altitude awareness. It's best to look down at the ground and visually check your altitude in addition to using your altimeter. If you're above the hard deck, you can try to correct the problem. If you're at the hard deck, cut away and pull your reserve.
A pilot chute tangled with the suspension lines is probably not a problem. In fact, with lightly loaded, slow-opening canopies, a pilot chute over the front and snagged on an A-line is not at all uncommon. This may happen during the opening sequence or as the result of aggressive maneuvering. If there clearly is a problem, break away and pull the reserve. On the other hand, if the canopy is stable, is steerable, can be flared, and has a safe rate of descent, it can be landed. If the problem occurs on a regular basis, you may want to have a rigger check the parachute and deployment system. In particular, have the line trim checked to make sure the canopy doesn't need to be relined.
In student training, you're normally taught that line twists are not a malfunction because you have plenty of time and altitude to let them untwist. With smaller, more highly loaded canopies, line twists can become a problem that requires a cutaway. If you have line twists and you've locked yourself into an asymmetrical body position, that can make the canopy continue to turn. And it might turn in the direction that makes the getting line twists out pretty difficult, if not impossible, to do just by kicking. In those cases, you might need to cut away.
The traditional method of getting rid of line twists is to scissors your legs and kick in the direction to remove the twists while torquing your body in the same direction. Once your momentum builds up, the lines will readily untwist. Of course, the best way to handle line twists is to have the knowledge on how to avoid them.
Several factors influence whether a canopy will open on heading and without line twists. First, the bag needs to lift straight upright and clear of the container before the lines start to unstow. Then, the lines and risers need to release symmetrically as the deployment continues. Finally, it's important to fly through the entire opening sequence, from pilot chute launch to open canopy with a symmetrical body position. Let's take a closer look at each of these issues. Quite often, a person tilts to one side, usually towards the left, as any hand-deployed pilot chute is launched. This causes the bag to be pulled into the right sidewall as it leaves the container. Now, if the lines are stowed too close to the risers and a line stow tugs on one side, the bag will probably spin as it leaves. An unsymmetrical body position can cause a rapid turn during canopy inflation, which may result in line twists if the jumper doesn't stay aligned with the parachute. The faster a parachute can turn, the more likely the jumper won't keep up. Knowing this information, you can take steps to guard against line twists.
First of all, take care while packing to keep your canopy and line straight. Then use tight enough stow bands on each side to correctly retain your lines, and leave 18 to 24 inches of unstowed lines between the risers and the first line stow so that the bag leaves the container before loading the stow. When you launch your pilot chute, keep your body totally symmetrical, the shoulders and hips level, and torso straight. As the slider starts down, feel the canopy's feedback through the harness. If you feel a higher load on one side of the harness, keep your hips level by resisting the tilting force.
If the canopy does turn during the opening, it's important to go with that turn. Don't resist it or try to torque yourself in the opposite direction. In the event you have line twists and the canopy is flying straight, you can probably get out of them. However, if your canopy is sensitive to harness movement, kicking and twisting may inadvertently introduce an unsymmetrical body position, which is then locked in by the line twists. This will start the canopy turning and may develop into an unrecoverable spiral requiring a cutaway. Instead, try this. To move the line twists down the lines where you can reach them, push the risers together and twist them below your hands in the direction of the existing line twists. Then reach above the twists and start unwinding by separating the line groups. Once your momentum builds up, the lines will readily untwist. The canopy's susceptibility to this problem, that is, a sensitivity to harness movements during the entire deployment, depends on its wing loading, aspect ratio, and how elliptical it is.
line twist with this new state-of-the-art parachutes that we're jumping and these high-speed small ellipticals. Line twists, they can kill you. It's a decision, depending on the amount of line twist that you have and as to whether you're starting to unwind or if you're starting to spin towards the ground. You have to be able to make that decision depending on what you have over your head, and you have to make the right decision. If you're in doubt, cut away, trust your reserve.
If one brake line releases, it's going to put you into a spiral. One factor is whether you're spiraling with or without line twists, and also the wing loading of the canopy. The obvious thing is to release the other brake and see if the canopy flies properly. If it flies properly and you're with no twists, no big deal. If you've got a lot of line twists, you need to keep aware of your altitude and decide whether, with the particular gear you're using, if it's a problem or not.
If you lose the deployment brake on opening, your canopy will probably turn into the direction of the released brake if that side of the canopy isn't completely inflated and flying. In any event, this problem is easily prevented. Ensure the deployment brakes are properly set during packing and make sure the toggles are securely retained. End keepers work the best. Then, periodically inspect your steering lines for wear to prevent a broken line which might require a cutaway. Although once quite uncommon with ram airs, the line over is occurring with increasing frequency. During your canopy check, a line over will be quite obvious. Normally, the rate of descent will be arrested to a great extent. If sufficient altitude is available and the canopy is somewhat stable, you may be able to pull down and release the line group on the small side and clear the line over. On the other hand, this malfunction may require an immediate breakaway and reserve activation. Remember, the first priority is to break away and pull the reserve. If you have time, pull with stability to improve reserve opening reliability. Use the hard deck to establish your priorities.
Line over malfunctions are caused by two major things. The first, and I think most common, is poor line stows, resulting in some lines unstowing while other lines aren't unstowing, and the relative wind blows them upwards and the parachute goes underneath it. The second cause of line over malfunctions, in my opinion, is when people are putting the parachute in the bag, they push stuff around the sides, and not so much in the making it ready to fold up, but after it's been S-folded up, people tend to push stuff around the sides, and then it gets around underneath one of the folds and causes a line over. Either one is actually quite easily eliminated.
Of course, there are other possible causes.
So what you do with the lines is very important. You've got to keep the lines all centered in the canopy and don't put them around to the front, as I talked about earlier, by throwing down a Pro-Pack and the lines falling around the sides of the canopy. You've got to be sure before you start putting the canopy in the bag that all the lines are on top of each other, all right, and nothing is around the front. You put steering lines around the front, you have a line over malfunction in your canopy. So be very, very careful how you handle the lines.
Tension knots are probably one of the most common ram air malfunctions.
50% of square parachute malfunctions have been found to be knotted lines. Knotted lines are often caused by a pigtail. Do you know what a pigtail is in a line? You get a pigtail next to another pigtail, and the two of them hook together, and suddenly that is just a trap for all kinds of other lines. A couple of things that you can do to prevent that are don't milk your lines. When you make your line stows, don't push the slack down to the bottom. You should keep good tension on those lines at all time, pushing any slack up into the canopy. You have a whole lot more potential for knots or entanglement if you have your what I call spaghetti, loose, uneven tension on the lines down at the bottom rather than up at the top.
If the canopy opens in a hard turn, there's a good chance you have a problem with the lines. In some cases, the toggles can be used to straighten out the turn while you evaluate the situation. Here you can see the knotted lines on the left preventing that side from fully opening, although the rate of descent is drastically reduced. Since the tension knots are caused by line loading, you will probably not be able to clear this malfunction, and you'll need to break away and activate the reserve. If you open and have tension knots that include either the front and back line groups or the right and left line groups, the slider may be entangled as well. The higher the slider is up the lines, the more the canopy is prevented from fully opening, and the higher the rate of descent. Again, you may be able to use the toggles to straighten out the turn while you evaluate the situation. In this case, the jumper has determined that the malfunction can't be cleared and has decided that a cutaway and a reserve ride is the only way to safely handle the situation. If you look up and see this, you don't have a malfunction, you have an end cell closure. After a slow or soft opening, the slider may frequently stop partway down the lines, pulling the canopy in at all the edges. Or the slider may be all the way down, but one or both end cells may not be fully inflated. In any case, pull down the rear risers or the brakes until the end cells inflate. The Eldamaster 3 from SSE Incorporated is just one of the many fine products that are used worldwide by sport and military jumpers. Our designs are innovative, rugged, and reliable. SSE, air instrumentation and parachute accessories for the safety of your next jump. Parachute Equipment Corporation has showrooms in Vincenttown, New Jersey. So before you rent or buy gear, call PEC. We've been selling top-quality skydiving equipment and accessories since 1975, and we ship worldwide. PEC. If we don't sell it, find out why.
Name your game.
You want to win?
You gotta go fast.
The Jump Shack invites you to experience an intentional cutaway on one of our Racer intentional cutaway rigs. Experience it for yourself. The Racer Elite, because it works. Let's take a look at the issues concerning the reserve static line.
By now you've seen a lot of breakaways, and it probably seems fairly straightforward. To break away and save yourself, you pull the cutaway handle, then you pull the reserve. Every year, though, there are a number of jumpers who have trouble getting a grip on this simple procedure. In fact, worldwide, perhaps as much as 45% of all fatalities have been due to a cutaway and no reserve pull, or a cutaway and a low reserve pull. The USPA summary for a recent 9-year period shows that almost 10% of all fatalities were due to the same cause. It has been pointed out that these fatalities might have been prevented if the jumper had been equipped with a reserve static line, and few would disagree with this conclusion. For this reason, there is an increasing trend toward recommending the use of the RSL for all jumpers. If you're unfamiliar with the RSL system, here's a short description. The reserve static line is simply a lanyard connecting one or both main canopy risers to the reserve ripcord. In the event of a successful breakaway where sufficient drag is created by the main canopy, the release risers and RSL will probably activate the reserve. Those who favor the use of an RSL for all jumpers point out that this is a simple, passive device which should not change normal emergency procedures. In the event of a malfunction, simply cut away and go for the reserve, ignoring the RSL entirely. After all, it's only a backup device. It's further pointed out that the jumper has the option of using a quick release to disconnect the RSL if so desired. With these facts in mind, let's look at the suitability of the RSL for different experience levels and activities. It's universally agreed that the RSL is ideal for students due to their low experience and level of awareness. The RSL has also been in use for tandem jumps due to the higher speeds and greater workload on the instructor during a malfunction. The common denominator with student and tandem jumps is that relatively docile canopies are utilized, deployment takes place at higher altitudes, and these jumps rarely involve other skydivers in the same airspace. Contrast this with the environment of the experienced jumper under a high-performance canopy at a lower altitude in crowded airspace. Under these conditions, there are definitely circumstances under which the jumper might not want an immediate reserve activation, such as a violently spinning malfunction, a canopy collision, or a cutaway in close proximity to other jumpers. Also, unless a strong arch is held throughout the deployment, it's quite probable that instability will be experienced during the cutaway of a high-speed malfunction. Thus, an experienced jumper with an RSL has an added step in not only the decision-making process, but possibly the reserve procedures as well. Of course, CRW jumpers and freefall photographers should never jump with an active RSL. As pointed out in this video, a canopy wrap or an entanglement both require the ability to delay the reserve deployment. And due to the possibility of entanglement, the last thing a camera person needs is to be deploying the reserve during instability. Let's re-examine those fatalities caused by a cutaway and a low reserve pull or no reserve pull. What else might have saved these individuals? How about a higher deployment altitude? An altitude commensurate with their awareness level and main canopy selection. And the most important preventative measure of all, thorough and regular recurrent training in emergency procedures. Come to think of it, how recently have you trained for a malfunction? Maybe it's time to get with the program. Then if you still decide the RSL is for you, go ahead and wear one. At least you've made an informed decision. But just remember this, backup devices are never a substitute for proper training and frequent review of emergency procedures. My personal recommendation is to review procedures on the way to altitude every jump.
Another very common malfunction is due to gear not being properly maintained. We receive parachutes at Performance Designs for reline all the time, and the customer just wants a reline. But we do a complete inspection, and we frequently find that the parachute has areas of damage which, if they were left undetected, would have resulted in a failure of the parachute, a structural failure. So a simple inspection of the gear can eliminate those types of malfunctions. Out-of-sequence openings can cause really hard openings, and that can tear the parachute up. Sometimes a hard opening is just shaken off, but the parachute should be looked at because it can create small areas of damage. Those areas of damage might hold in for another 50 or 100 jumps, but when they go, and it usually goes from nose to tail.
A nose-to-tail split is a major structural failure. This canopy's bottom skin has failed next to the seam which carries the suspension line loads. Although the canopy is flying straight, you can see the leading edge is deformed in front of the failed area. A damaged canopy is probably safe to land if it's stable, can be steered, can be flared, and has a safe rate of descent. Carefully monitor your altitude to make sure you stay above the hard deck while you evaluate the canopy's controllability. When you check the handling, make sure the canopy is well behaved during slow flight and during the flare, since you need to do both to land. Although a control problem will be quite evident, determining that the rate of descent is safe for landing may be difficult. If you're jumping a canopy with a high wing loading, it's probably not a good idea to land it. In any event, if there clearly is a problem or any doubt exists, break away and activate the reserve.
Broken lines are due to in a combination of usually a hard opening or improper maintenance of the gear. Whether it's a dangerous malfunction or not depends on what parachute you're jumping and what wing loading, and also what line breaks. If it's one of the front lines of the canopy, an A line, a B line, especially if it's in the lower portion, which controls an A and a B line, it can really cause problems at high wing loadings. On a large canopy, student-type canopy, you might land it. On a small, high-performance canopy, you would probably cut it away.
At first glance, a broken line might be hard to spot, especially if it doesn't seem to immediately affect the canopy's flight characteristics. That's why it's always important to do a controllability and flare check after opening. If you suspect something is not quite right, a closer inspection should reveal the problem. This broken outer A line is affecting the canopy during the flare, and the jumper has decided to go to Plan B. Remember, if you doubt you can safely land your main, break away and use your reserve. If you have a broken line that's not critical, the flight characteristics of the canopy may seem barely affected at all. In fact, if you jump a docile canopy with a light wing loading, you may not notice any significant change in flight characteristics. In this case, since the canopy is controllable and flares, the jumper has decided to land it. If a steering line is broken, it may be possible to steer and flare using the rear risers, although this might not be a good idea with highly loaded canopies. A zero porosity canopy, coupled with a high-speed deployment and sloppy packing, can cause more than canopy damage.
My worst nightmare as far as a malfunction is an out-of-sequence deployment involving a complete line dump bag strip situation. That results in the canopy deploying before the lines are extended, and it's a brutally hard opening that can knock people unconscious, damage the equipment, break risers, just all sorts of stuff that's extremely dangerous. Most obvious thing is making sure the lines are stowed tightly enough with long enough bites, but there's also other factors involved. Number one is how fast are you going? The faster you're going, the more effective the pilot chute is, and the harder it yanks on the bag. Number two, since I already mentioned it, is the pilot chute itself, and also body position plays a factor in it.
A canopy collision is possibly a skydiver's greatest fear. Fortunately, canopy relative work jumpers have developed emergency procedures for both wraps and entanglements.
There are several situations that can result in having a collision with another parachute. The common denominator is not looking where you're going. If you do collide with another parachute, there's two common things that can result. One is a wrap and the other is an entanglement. A wrap is when your parachute is wrapped around the other jumper or his parachute is wrapped around you. An entanglement is when the two parachutes are entangled with each other and the jumpers are dangling below the entanglement. In a wrap, you do not want the top jumper to release his parachute, because then he would just go into free fall with the lower jumper's parachute wrapped around him. That just makes the situation worse. So if he can't climb out of the parachute, then it's up to the lower jumper to release his parachute going into free fall and deploying as reserve. The top jumper would then be able to climb out of the parachute because the tension is off of him. In an entanglement, if the lower jumper releases first, his lines and risers may recoil upward and tangle with the top jumper. When the two parachutes are entangled with each other, it's best if the upper jumper cuts away first. If you have a collision and find yourself at 500 feet or lower under the two parachutes, it's best not to cut away that low because you may not have sufficient time to open a reserve. It's better to just deploy your reserves into the mess, adding more nylon and making the best of the situation. If you find yourself in a wrap or an entanglement, it's important to communicate with the other jumper. You need to communicate the altitude, the problem, and the plan. Don't just automatically yell, "I'm going to cut away," because he may only hear the cutaway part and execute a cutaway himself. It's better to say, "I'm out of here," or "you cut away," so you clearly communicate what you want done.
Hey, where did you come from? Oh! Okay, dude! I'm out of here! Oh, yeah! Yeah, it was good! Oh, gosh!
After carefully considering the information in this video, you may decide to change your emergency procedures to achieve a higher level of safety. For instance, you may have changed your mind about your cutaway procedures, or perhaps you've decided to add an RSL to your parachute system. Here's something to consider. Due to the difficulty in changing ingrained habits, especially those you depend on when highly stressed, it is absolutely essential you receive thorough training in the new procedures. In fact, you should plan your response to every imaginable emergency, then train the procedures until you are confident you can perform them under the stress of the actual event. It's best to have an instructor help you with this training, especially if you are less than a highly experienced skydiver. I hope you've enjoyed Breakaway as much as we've enjoyed producing it. But most important of all, I hope you'll use this information to improve your skills and achieve a higher level of safety. After all, that's the most important objective of this video, to help you become a safer skydiver. Dan Pointer's technical manuals and books are read worldwide. His library includes these fine books and are available at most major gear shops.
Parachute Equipment Corporation has showrooms in Vincenttown, New Jersey. So before you rent or buy gear, call PEC. We've been selling top-quality skydiving equipment and accessories since 1975, and we ship worldwide. PEC. If we don't sell it, find out why.
Can you believe this footage? Yeah, these guys are great. Check out the freestyle. This babe's hot.
Bitchin'. Hey, why are you cranking the channels?
I'm looking for the Night Naked All-Girl 20-Way competition. Starts any minute now.
Well, I sure wouldn't want to miss that.
Not in your life, dude. Just think. Beautiful women frolicking in the air. Your favorite libation? I mean, life doesn't get any better than that.
Square One provides skydivers throughout the world with all major brands of parachuting equipment, from hook knife to Cypress. Call today for your free color catalog. 1-800-877-7191. Special thanks to Tim and Sherry Butcher at Air Ohio Skydiving and Gear Sales.